I have a lovely guest here today who has spent many years working in the field of sexual addiction recovery. This is Marsha Means. She is the founder and director of a Circle of Joy Ministries. She trained as a marriage and family therapist, but now she works over the phone as a coach. She also writes and speaks on the topic of betrayal trauma and sex addiction. And she was at the forefront of a movement when the therapeutic community within it to understand sex addiction, including infidelity, pornography, and other forms of sexually acting out, as causing a particular type of betrayal that traumatizes the addict's partner. And her work is based on both her personal life and her professional experience. And one of the books that she has authored is Learn Empathy, Help Your Betrayed Wife Recover. And she has so much of a wealth of many, many years of wisdom and experience. So, Marsha, I'd just like to start out with asking you why you wrote the book Learn Empathy in the first place.
I've worked with partners mostly. I was in a marriage affected by sex addiction in 1990. And by 1996, I was in grad school getting my master's so I could help the women that were calling our home because I only knew my experience. I hadn't learned about psychology or therapy or anything yet. But by about 1996, especially in 1999, my husband and I founded a nonprofit in the Seattle area called Prodigals International. And I was a therapist in our office and met with mostly women face to face, worked with them in small support groups using a workbook that I had written for partners, worked with some couples. Ultimately, I lost my marriage to the addiction, but I went on to kind of figure out who I was on my own, and I started my own website, and I work on Zoom. I need to update my website because you read phone, but we work on Zoom now that video is possible. But still, in about 2019, I think is when I started noticing women in my support groups who had sober husbands. They were no longer acting out. They were going to SAA. They were walking in accountability, but women were divorcing them. Not a lot, but I kept hearing it pop up. So I started asking why. And it was because their husbands didn't know how to show empathy. They were supposed to get over it now because he was sober, but they hadn't been able to alleviate their own pain, the betrayal trauma, because they hadn't been able to get any empathy from him or just comfort, recognizing the damage, like empathy allows us to do. It allows us to recognize another person's pain and be there for them in it. So I started researching. Initially, I used a workbook called Help Her Heal and started working with men in small groups. But I wasn't getting the results that I had hoped for. So I kept researching, and it took several years because I had to work, and I lost my mom during that period as well. But eventually, 2 years ago, I think it was, I published my workbook, Learn Empathy, Help Your Betrayed Wife Heal. I wrote it based on the research that I found. I'm thrilled to report that empathy can be learned. We're supposed to learn it as babies, as children, as we grow up in our home, because it's based on attachment to people we love. But because so many parents weren't bonded to the way they needed to be bonded to. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to give it. So working with men now, I hear men say, one man, his words still haunt me. He said, we were 4 people living in a house alone. There was no real connection. Emotions weren't talked about. They weren't shared. And empathy requires that. It requires that when our child shares emotions, that we're there to listen, we're there to comfort or encourage, to hug. But if we didn't get that kind of parenting, we don't absorb those kinds of skills. I think of empathy. I always think of making pickles. I only made pickles when I was a young bride a long time ago. But I remember you sterilize quart jars, you pack cucumbers in these jars, you boil a brine and you pour it over the cucumbers while it's hot. And then you seal it. If you open it tomorrow, there's still cucumbers. But if you leave it sealed for X number of months, you open the jar, it's a pickle. And empathy is like that. Babies are cucumbers. And parents don't often know it. But one of our jobs in raising them is to turn them into empathy pickles. And we do that by modeling empathy with them and with our partner and with the people in our family and our friends. But a huge percentage of people are born into homes where they're pickle makers, because they weren't born into homes that were pickle makers. I was truly blessed. My parents weren't perfect, but boy, did we know they loved us. And we got lots and lots of hugs and kisses, and we were told we were loved. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough for us to grow up, knowing, all 4 of us, knowing how to attach, to bond. And that attachment is the foundation of empathy, and we can talk about it.
That's really beautiful. So backing up into the whole like healing power of empathy after betrayal, when we talk about betrayal, it's a wound. So why does betrayal hurt so much and create such devastation for the partner and the relationship?
It's like, when you marry as a woman, and I know you know this, it takes a certain amount of surrendering of ourselves to becoming a partnership. And we don't do that unless we feel safe. And a lot because of fairy tales, because of movies, even in this era, I still see it, especially in Hallmark video movies. There's this boy meets girl and the magic happens and it's happily ever after. So we buy into that, and that's what we expect. And so we just surrender to the process and to the man. And that becomes our foundation. It's what we build our adult lives on. We buy a home, we put it on that foundation, and we have children, and it feels safe, it feels secure. We have bank accounts, we share our finances, we share retirement usually. And suddenly, when we discover or our partner discloses there's this intimate betrayal, whether it's pornography or prostitutes, we experience it as the bottom falling out underneath us. That foundation that everything is built on, the mortgage, the babies, the everything, the bank account, suddenly it feels like it vanishes. We're suspended in midair, almost like we're out in space in the black. Floating is the way it feels. Total loss of security, a loss of sense of safety in the world. If I can't trust you, who can I trust? And then we don't even trust ourselves because we chose him. And some women feel a lot of shame about that. They think, and they feel shame, if not shame, they feel less than. If I'm not enough, then there must be something wrong with me. He had to look elsewhere to get sexual stimulation. So just all kinds of reasons why it's so terribly painful.
Yeah. That's the safety and the feeling less than. Those are things that, I've heard behind the scenes here at Ever Accountable for sure. So starting there, how can a betrayed partner find her way through betrayal when her world is just fallen apart?
Absolute first thing she needs to do is find safety. And for a lot of partners, they can't do that while cohabitating with the person who betrayed them. And that creates all kinds of problems because it's expensive to have two households temporarily or permanently, however it ends. But often partners will ask their husband to move out temporarily just so they can feel safe in their own home again, or they'll ask him to move into another bedroom or sleep on the sofa if there isn't a spare bedroom. Reestablishing that sense of safety is essential because as long as we don't feel safe, our brain, the trauma response that's going on inside of us is physiological. Our chemicals are being released into our bloodstream that are meant for emergencies to give us a shot of power, energy, to take care of an emergency. They were never designed to be pumped into our system 24/7. And when they are, they're toxic, and the cells get bathed in those chemicals, and it causes, just like a cut causes an inflammatory response. Internally, there's an inflammatory response that gets set off in the body. And if this goes on long enough, if you feel unsafe long enough, it begins to affect your health long term. In the short term, almost every betrayed partner experiences extreme anxiety, often deep depression. Women sometimes get agoraphobic. They just feel so afraid. They're afraid to leave their home. They feel isolated. They don't know who to share it with. Their girlfriends don't understand. They'll often go to someone like a minister or a rabbi or a priest. And way too often they get told this is normal, or you need to give them more sex. More and more education is being provided for leaders so that happens less often than it used to, but it still happens. So women shut down. They don't know who to talk to, and they're afraid to tell their parents. They're afraid their parents will turn on their husband, and they're not sure they want to lose him. They love him, but he's the one that hurt them. So that's what goes on in the body, the loss of safety, that not knowing where to turn. She needs to reestablish safety somehow. Boundaries. Establishing safety requires boundaries. Suddenly, she may have not have had any boundaries with him before, and most of us are very good at boundaries unless we've taken a class or had special training in the home. So how to do that and how to do it well is hard. So those are skills, we have to learn. And she needs to find a safe place to talk about it, not just talk about it, because repeating the story ad nauseum won't heal it. It requires a process. Like we know that grief has stages, and that you have to move through those stages. It's clear when someone dies, we recognize in the beginning it works. I mean, I remember when each of my parents died, you're just completely at a loss, and you move through it, and you come out the other side, and you might still tear up when you talk about them. But that horrible, agonizing loss isn't with you 24/7. And that's the way it is with betrayal trauma, that horrible, agonizing loss and fear and not knowing who to go to, where to turn, or what to do. You don't want to stay stuck there. Remember, those inflammatory chemicals are pouring in, and that's just no way to live. But you need a process, you need a guide who understands how to get through that jungle and get you out to the other side. And so finding that, ideally with a small group of women, I honestly believe, or at least in my experience working for decades now with partners, we heal best with sisters, small groups, so that we can really bond. I ideally I work with five, or worked with five. I work mostly with men now and couples, but we become mirrors for each other. Like our self-esteem is so damaged by betrayal that we don't know our own value. We don't see ourselves clearly, but the other women in the group see us for who we are, and they reflect that back in the way they treat us, in the things they say. We become sisters, we bond, we love each other, and that alone can be very healing. But doing a process, stepping stones that lead us out of the abyss, doing that with sisters and a guide who's been through it herself, hopefully, so she understands, but she's healed, and she understands that process that moves you out. That's essential. And you become a different person. You actually grow because of the betrayal. It just, like all hard experiences in life, stretch us. We grow new muscles. This does the same. And we come through it. And when it's fully processed, we know it because it's just a part of our story. It doesn't hurt. It's just just a small part of our story.
So you've talked about how to heal, basically, like moving through that process with a guide, with a support group of people who have walked this journey, also who are walking this journey. So I think you kind of answered that question of like how to, and that's something that you provide at Circle of Joy.
Yes.
I noticed a number of coaches on your website, both men and women. And so you offer like some of those groups for women.
Yes. Jody on my team does groups and individual work with women, and Catherine works individually with women.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So moving on to like talking a little bit more about the healing power of empathy. You talked about what healing requires and how a relationship can heal. You talked about her healing, and now we're stepping into can this relationship heal and how can it heal?
Yes. I think of our healing as partners, as our work to do. We need our husbands to encourage us, to love us, to provide empathy for us. But that alone isn't going to do it. Our work is finding that path and moving through, processing the grief, coming out the other side. But restoration of a relationship is his work to do. Many women stay in a relationship, even if it isn't fully restored, but it's not much fun. It's a lonely place for both partners to live. If the addict wants his wife back 100%, he has to provide empathy. And then we run into the challenge of, does he know how to do it? And after all the years I've worked in this arena, during the last, however long it's been, 6-7 years, I've come to see that in sex addiction recovery, that piece has been missing. I think Help Her Heal was the first, perhaps the only voice, that workbook voice addressing this issue. Certainly as therapists, we recognized husbands needed to provide that, but I didn't recognize that just getting sober, going to an SAA meeting or another similar group to deal with the addiction, finding accountability, the normal prescription for sex addicts. I didn't recognize, if that's a small puzzle, if those pieces are a small puzzle, I didn't recognize there was a puzzle piece missing. You're not going to really restore or heal your relationship if you don't know how to do that missing piece. And that is the empathy piece. So what do these men do if they don't know how? When I honestly wasn't sure when I started this research if empathy could be taught. I think I know I've run into it, a belief or understanding that some people are born with it and some people aren't. Mm-hmm. And the people who are become nurses and therapists, helping professionals, and the rest of them become engineers, etc. But that's not true. It can be learned. It's easier if you learn it, from the moment you're born, because you just absorb it like that pickle. But it can be taught. And I now work with men in those small Zoom groups, 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 4 men who share their stories so that they can connect and bond. And then we work through the workbook that I've written. And I'm old enough now. I'm a grandma with not baby grandchildren, they're getting up there. So it feels safe for me as an older woman to work with men. There's no triggering going on for them because I was old as their mother or their grandma in some cases. And I think it provides somewhat of a maternal presence for the younger men, at least. So we start at the beginning and we work through the chapters, and we start with attachment, that bonding, because that's the foundation that empathy is built on. And I use a lot of videos in the workbook, and the first chapter on attachment, I use a video that's been on YouTube for a long time. It was a research video, but it shows about a 7 or 8 month old baby and her mama, and they're doing it. They're bonding, and it's then say it's interesting how a man recently said this, how a baby so young knows how to do it, and then get so frustrated and angry and afraid when mama turns away, because in that research, she turns her back and the baby flails and squeals because the attachment's been broken. And that's exactly the way partners feel when they discover, they flail and know their wives are flailing. They hear them yell, they hear them sob. But that shows the men. And I asked in the workbook, do you think you got this? And most of them, well, all of the men I work with say no, they didn't. And so then we do the next chapter, which is about learning to recognize our emotions, because so many boys are told, big boys don't cry, suck it up, be a man. I've watched even relatives tell their 4-year-old, suck it up, be a man. And, now I know how toxic that message is, because that means that boy child is stuffing his emotions, and then they lose track of what's going on inside. And that is essential, that knowing how we're doing and showing up for how another person is doing is an essential part of empathy. It's also an essential part of sobriety, because when we don't know what's going on inside, we recognize, I don't feel good today. Something's off. Or he's feeling tempted, and we treat our pain with something. It might be chocolate. It might be work, or it can be alcohol, or drugs, or sex, or any number of things. But there's nothing at greater risk than an addict who doesn't know what's going on inside, so that he can take care of himself, even when he feels off, because otherwise he's going to try to medicate. And historically, he's done that with porn or some other form of sex and outside the marriage. And he's at risk of shattering his wife all over again and losing his sobriety.
Yes, so I'm hearing two things. There's a kind of a buzzword that goes around in therapy circles called reparenting yourself.
Yes.
And I've actually used that on myself, because there's the scripture that talks to, even in the Old Testament, that says, don't walk in the sins of your fathers. That could also apply to your mothers. But if we don't recognize, so we're being honest, my parents weren't perfect, so I need to reparent myself in a certain way. And it sounds like you're helping men reparent themselves.
Yes.
And then just that whole lack of empathy, also in Old Testament, I'm bringing this for the believers. We have a beautiful mixed audience of people who are not believers and people who are, but God refers to himself as a mother. He's like, as a mother comforts her children, I will gather you, to Israel that's just been through this extremely, painful circumstances. And God talks about a mother hen gathering chicks under her wings. And he refers to himself with mother comfort. So the whole Jesus and John Wayne kind of mentality, you just have to suck it up. That's not who we see God is.
No.
When he talks about himself, and even Jesus, I am gentle and lowly in heart. Come to me and find rest. So when I'm hearing that, I'm hearing this beautiful, you're helping men do this, and you're like the mother or grandmother that they needed.
Yes, it's fun, really fun work, and the most rewarding work I've ever done.
And here's the beautiful thing is these men want help. So
They do.
yes. And that's a part of like the last question you have here is how can a betrayed partner heal if her betrayer isn't interested in recovery and shows no empathy? So that doesn't apply to your clients, but that does apply to some women, sadly, in your circles that you help.
I've seen women stay for the sake of the children, or they can't afford to leave, or in some cases, they don't believe they're supposed to leave. The only way we can heal without empathy is the boundaries get a lot more like a partition, down the middle of a room. These women will kind of develop their own lives, and the husbands kind of develop theirs. It's not what either of them want, but they don't know how to find each other because that until she feels empathy, he's not safe to reconnect with. So there's a certain amount of isolation, two silos under one roof. And oh, but does that get miserable when the kids are gone? It's a very lonely way to do marriage. Other women choose to leave. And I've done surveys on different topics of the population who has followed us over the years. And I did one to determine what women were looking for. I did it as I did the research for empathy. And I think I asked 5 questions, and it was so clear. Some of those surveys are in the first 37 pages of my workbook, Learn Empathy, because I want men to recognize it's not just their wives who are wanting this. I think initially I had 167 responses, and I chose the ones to include in the workbook that were the clearest, so men could really see. And partners said what they needed. They needed empathy. They needed non-defensive communication, which we do in the workbook. But women who didn't get those things, they answered the questions either by staying and creating their own life, because he never did help her reconnect. He didn't show empathy. He still doesn't. Or other women, usually women who had the financial means, would leave because they knew what marriage was supposed to be. They knew what they needed. They knew what they were looking for. They didn't need him to do life, so they left. It's very, very hard for a marriage to heal without empathy. I think impossible, is I would say, but I'm sure there are those who disagree with me. But empathy is essential for any marriage, for any close relationship. But after betrayal, guys, if you don't know how to do this, you're never going to get the wife you married back 100%. And the most fascinating thing I've learned working with men the last several years is these guys love us. Men love their wives. They are terrified of losing us. So it's not, it's not that we're not enough. It's that they have wounds that they were medicating with sex. And they don't want to lose you if you're married to a sex addict.
Yes. And those are the men that you are working with that really want change. They want healing. They want to become the person who they were intended to. So yeah, there is a lot of hope out there.
There is.
You are facilitating hope by your work.
And I want to mention that I have another man of 4 years. He was a sex addict. His wife is a therapist. He's a coach. Been in recovery forever. well, not that long, but for a very long time. He lives in Scotland. They're from South Africa, but he also does groups and individual work with men. He's on my website. And then I have another man who's done 3 empathy groups with me. He's now a coach. He's leaving the field of IT, but he does. There's some of the men, not a lot, but some their group ends and they need more practice. The empathy hasn't become second nature yet, so they started asking, for a practice group. And this man, he's from India. His name is Ajay, but he's doing a practice group now. So some of the men join that after their group ends. I also am very happy to let any man audit a second group with me. They don't have to pay. I don't ask them very many questions during the meetings because I need to serve them, the paying men. But they're there, they share their story, they connect, and they get an opportunity to hear it again and listen to them in process. So that reinforces what they've learned.
So can people find all those resources on your website
They
for
can.
each of those groups? Okay. I will make sure that we list those links and the link to your workbook, especially in our YouTube notes and also on the blog from this event. And thank you so much for helping us talk through this topic. At the end here, if you were to sum up empathy, how would that be?
There's a little Brene Brown video on YouTube, and I included in my workbook. A man referred to it last week in a group session. It's a video, and one of the animals is down in the bottom of a hole, hurting. And the video shows you can either holler down in the hole, encouragement, or you can climb down the ladder and sit by, I don't remember if it was Eeyore or who the animals were, but they were humanized. And the one crawled down the ladder and sat down by the other and just was with them in their pain. That is a beautiful picture of empathy. Showing up, turning toward, leaning in, asking open-ended questions, just loving.
Thank you so much. That is beautiful. And we really appreciate you bringing your time and your just years of wisdom to this conversation.
Thank you.